In 1961, a five-star general who had commanded the largest military force in human history sat behind the presidential desk for the last time. And instead of celebrating his legacy, he issued a warning. A warning so dangerous, so specific, that no sitting president has dared repeat it since. Dwight D. Eisenhower told America that its own defense industry had become a threat to democracy itself. The military-industrial complex now writes the policies that start the wars that buy their weapons. Think about that. The man who led D-Day, who knew war better than anyone alive, spent his final moments in office telling you that the real enemy wasn't overseas. It was in Washington. And 60 years later, the machine he warned about hasn't just survived. It has grown beyond control. The defense budget has ballooned to over $800 billion a year. Lobbyists outnumber elected officials. And the same corporations that build the bombs sit on the advisory boards that decide where to drop them. This isn't conspiracy. This is the blueprint. And today, we're going to tear it apart, piece by piece, name by name, dollar by dollar. Because what Eisenhower warned about didn't just come true. It became the operating system of your government. Eisenhower's warning, January 17th, 1961. 3 days before John F. Kennedy takes office. Eisenhower steps before the cameras, and what comes out of his mouth shocks the nation. He doesn't talk about Soviet missiles or communist expansion. He talks about America eating itself from the inside. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Now here's what most people miss. Eisenhower didn't stumble onto this idea. He watched it happen in real time. During World War II, American industry converted overnight. Car factories became tank factories. Washing machine plants became ammunition plants. And when the war ended, something terrifying happened. Nothing stopped. The factories didn't convert back. The contracts kept flowing. The generals who retired didn't go home to their farms. They went to boardrooms. By 1961, defense spending was already consuming over half the federal budget. Eisenhower saw a permanent war economy being built, brick by brick, contract by contract. And he knew that once it was built, no president would have the power to tear it down. He was right, but the story gets much darker from here. The revolving door. Here's how the machine actually works. A general spends 30 years in the Pentagon. He oversees weapons programs worth billions. He approves contracts. He shapes procurement policy. Then he retires. And within months, he's sitting on the board of Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or Boeing, getting paid $500,000 a year. For what? For his Rolodex, for his relationships, for his ability to call his former colleagues and say, we've got this new missile system you should really look at. Generals become salesmen. This isn't hypothetical. Between 2008 and 2018, over 380 senior Pentagon officials went directly to work for defense contractors. 380. And it works the other way, too. Defense industry executives get appointed to Pentagon positions where they oversee the very contracts their former companies compete for. They call it public service. It's the most profitable conflict of interest in human history. If this is opening your eyes to how the game really works, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because the revolving door is just the entry point. The real corruption goes much deeper. Profit from fear. Ask yourself a simple question. If peace broke out tomorrow permanently, what would happen to Lockheed Martin's stock price? What would happen to Raytheon, to Northrop Grumman, to General Dynamics? Their stocks would collapse. Their shareholders would revolt. Their executives would lose their bonuses. Peace is the worst-case scenario for the defense industry. So what do? They manufacture threats, not with bombs, but with think tanks. The defense industry funds hundreds of think tanks and policy institutes in Washington. These think tanks produce reports. The reports say things like the threat from China is growing, or Russia is more aggressive than ever, or we need to modernize our nuclear arsenal. And then those reports land on the desks of senators, who receive campaign donations from the same companies that funded the think tanks. Threat reports fund more weapons. It's a closed loop. The company builds the weapon. The think tank justifies the weapon. The senator approves the weapon. The taxpayer pays for the weapon, and nobody ever asks whether the threat was real. As the legendary journalist I.F. Stone once warned, every government is run by liars, and nothing they say should be believed. But this leads us to something even more troubling about where your money actually goes. Your tax dollars. Let's follow the money. In 2023, the United States spent $886 billion on defense. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. More than China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan, and Australia put together. Combined. Now think about what that money could have done. At current estimates, you could have eliminated homelessness in America for about 20 billion. You could have made all public universities tuition-free for about 80 billion. You could have rebuilt every crumbling bridge and road for about 150 billion. And you'd still have over 500 billion left for actual defense. But that's not how the system works. The system works by spreading defense contracts across as many congressional districts as possible. The F-35 fighter jet has parts manufactured in 45 of the 50 states. That's not engineering efficiency. That's political engineering. Because when a senator votes against the F-35, they're voting against jobs in their own district. They're voting against their own re-election. The defense industry doesn't just buy politicians. It makes politicians dependent. It turns every vote into a jobs program. And that, my friends, is how $886 billion becomes untouchable. But wait, because the next piece of this puzzle changes everything. Wars by design. Here's the darkest part. Wars don't just happen, they're cultivated. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq based on intelligence that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. That intelligence was wrong. But who pushed it hardest? Who amplified it? Who demanded action? Many of the loudest voices had direct financial ties to defense contractors. The people who screamed for war profited from it. And Iraq wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern. Vietnam, the Gulf War, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, every single conflict followed the same playbook. Step 1, identify a threat, real or exaggerated. Step 2, amplify the threat through media and think tanks. Step 3, propose a military solution. Step 4, award contracts. Step 5, extend the mission indefinitely. 1, identify or exaggerate a threat. 2, amplify through media and think tanks. 3, propose military intervention. 4, award billion-dollar contracts. 5, extend the mission for decades. Afghanistan lasted 20 years. 20 years. The total cost exceeded $2.3 trillion, and when it ended, the Taliban took over in 11 days. The generals knew. The contractors knew. But the money was too good. As Major General Smedley Butler wrote decades earlier, war is a racket. It always has been. It is the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. And speaking of profit, what if I told you the system has gotten even more sophisticated? Lobbying machine. The defense industry spent $117 million on lobbying in 2022 alone. That's just the official number. The real figure, including dark money, think tank funding, and indirect influence, is estimated to be several times higher. And who are they lobbying? Every single member of the armed services committees in both the House and the Senate receives donations from defense contractors. Every single one. Not most, not nearly all. Every single one. The committee that's supposed to oversee the defense industry is funded by the defense industry. It's like asking the Farcs to guard the henhouse, but worse. Because the Farcs also built the henhouse, hired the security, and writes the rules for what counts as a chicken. The people who oversee defense spending are funded by defense companies. And it's not just money. Defense lobbyists write the actual legislation. Literally. Staffers on Capitol Hill have admitted that entire sections of defense authorization bills were drafted by lobbyist teams from Lockheed Martin and Boeing. The companies don't just influence the laws, they write them. Eisenhower saw the seed of this. He couldn't have imagined the forest. But this corruption extends far beyond Washington, and that's what most people completely miss. Global arms race. The military-industrial complex doesn't just arm America, it arms the world. The United States is the largest weapons exporter on the planet. In 2022, American arms sales to foreign governments exceeded $55 billion. And here's where it gets truly disturbing. America sells weapons to both sides of conflicts. The United States has sold weapons to Saudi Arabia, while simultaneously providing military aid to countries opposing Saudi interests in Yemen. It's not about who wins or loses. It's about who buys. Every conflict zone is a marketplace. Every regional tension is a sales opportunity. Defense companies employ entire departments dedicated to identifying emerging conflicts around the world, not to prevent them, to sell into them. As the legendary George Orwell once wrote, "The war is not meant to be won. It is meant to be continuous." And the global arms trade creates something even more sinister. It creates dependency. Dependency means control. When a country buys American weapons, they need American parts, American training, American software updates, American permission. They become locked into a relationship where the weapons manufacturer holds the keys. It's not defense. It's subscription warfare. And this brings us to the media's role in all of this. Media complicity. Turn on any major news network during a military crisis. Watch who they bring on as experts. Former generals, former admirals, former Pentagon officials, and almost every single one of them sits on the board of a defense contractor. Your news analysts have a financial stake in war. They don't tell you that. The Chiron says retired General so-and-so. It doesn't say paid consultant for Raytheon. NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox, they all do it. A study from the watchdog group Public Accountability Initiative found that in the lead-up to military interventions, over 75% of so-called military experts on major networks had undisclosed financial ties to the defense industry. The experts telling you war is necessary profit when war happens, and it goes deeper. Defense companies are major advertisers. Boeing doesn't run ads during football games because civilians buy fighter jets. They run those ads to ensure favorable media coverage, to make editors think twice before running critical stories. Advertising buys silence. The result is a media ecosystem where war is normalized. Questioning military spending is unpatriotic, and the people who profit most from conflict are treated as objective voices of wisdom. As Noam Chomsky observed, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion. But there's one more layer to this machine that nobody talks about. Tech takeover. The military-industrial complex has evolved. It's no longer just tanks and jets. It's algorithms and artificial intelligence. Silicon Valley and the Pentagon are merging. Amazon holds a $10 billion cloud computing contract with the Department of Defense. Google's Project Maven used artificial intelligence to analyze drone footage. Palantir's surveillance systems track movements across entire countries. The new weapons aren't made of steel. They're made of code. And this merger is creating something Eisenhower never imagined. A surveillance industrial complex layered on top of the military one. The same companies that track your shopping habits, your location, your conversations, are building the tools that governments use to wage war and monitor citizens. The defense budget now includes billions for cyber warfare, drone technology, and AI-powered weapons systems. And the tech companies competing for these contracts are the same ones that control your news feed, your search results, and your digital life. The companies that control your data now build weapons for your government. This isn't a future dystopia. This is happening right now. The line between civilian technology and military technology has been erased, and this convergence makes the original military-industrial complex look like a lemonade stand compared to what's coming. Breaking the cycle. So where does that leave us? Is the machine too big to stop? History says no. Every system built on deception eventually faces a reckoning. The Vietnam War ended not because the military ran out of bombs, but because citizens demanded the truth. The Pentagon Papers exposed the lies. Public pressure forced change. Truth breaks systems. The same can happen today, but it requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires paying attention. It requires following the money every single time a politician beats the drums of war. It requires asking who profits before asking who's the enemy. Every dollar spent on unnecessary weapons is a dollar stolen from schools and hospitals. Eisenhower said that too, the same speech, the same warning. But we've been conditioned to accept military spending as sacred, as untouchable, as patriotic. and questioning it, that's been labeled unpatriotic. Patriotism means to stand by the country. It does not mean to stand by the president or any other public official. The military-industrial complex survives because of silence, because of apathy, because most people would rather argue about culture wars while $800 billion disappears into contracts they'll never read. The cure is noise. The cure is awareness. The cure is you refusing to look away. Eisenhower's warning wasn't a prediction. It was a confession. He watched the machine being built during his presidency and knew he couldn't stop it. 63 years later, that machine doesn't just influence your government. It is your government. The defense industry writes the policies. The policies create the conflicts. The conflicts justify the budgets. The budgets fund the companies. And the companies fund the politicians who approve the budgets. Infinite war, infinite profit. It's the most elegant corruption ever designed. No single villain. No smoking gun. Just a system so intertwined with power that pulling one thread unravels everything. But systems change when people refuse to be silent. When voters demand transparency in defense spending. When citizens question why their roads crumble while missile systems multiply. When enough people understand that the real threat to America was never overseas. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. If you made it this far, comment Eisenhower was right to prove you see the machine for what it is. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.